What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be the next album for me to come back to the discography of one of UK's biggest bands of all time, that is of Oasis. And with that being said guys, I'm going to be reviewing the band's third studio album entitled Be Here Now. Be Here Now is the third studio album by Oasis. It was released on August 21st, 1997 by Creation Records. It's the follow-up to the highly acclaimed records of Definitely Maybe and What's the Story Morning Glory. This was produced by Owen Morris alongside Noel Gallagher. The album, according to the experience in the studio, were marred by arguments from band members and loads of drugs. And the band's motivations were commercial, and according to Noel Gallagher, he wanted to make the record as colossal as anything. The album released 4 singles: Do You Know What I Mean on the 7th of July 1997, Stand By Me on the 22nd of September, All Around the World on the 12th of January 1998, and Don't Go Away, released on the 19th of February, but only in Japan. Upon release, originally the album did receive high speculating reviews, but over time the album became an ignorable and dissatisfied release, comparing it as a weaker record to the first 2 albums. Noel Gallagher made a quote reflecting on the record. "It's the sound of a bunch of guys on coke in the studio not giving a fuck. There's no bass to it at all. I don't know what happened to that. And all the songs are really long and all the lyrics are shit. For every millisecond, Liam is not saying a word. There's a fucking guitar riff in there in a Wayne's World style." Despite that, the album went to number 1 in the UK albums and a number 2 first US top 5 release on the Billboard 200. In 2016, Noel decided to re-release the album. Be Here Now, as the third studio album in the discography, is, in my opinion, one of these, yes, different, but a separate sound of identity and presentation, because whereas with the first 2 albums, Definitely Maybe and What's the Story Morning Glory, these 2 records by themselves are just massive titans of rock population and of music history, with some of the most popular and biggest ever rock songs on the whole entire impact of making music. But with this album, in my opinion, Be Here Now's reputation still holds for many people at either a very positive reception or a mixed reception. And I think with my experience, every time I listened to this record, it was more or less on a mostly positive aspect. But I find that there are some comments from others that they think it is the best Oasis album, which personally I would beg to differ, because I do not think it would stand out as much or as greatly highly as the previous few albums earlier in the band's career. But I do think that this is more or less one of those albums that it's pretty underrated, but I would not find it to be, at the same time, not one of those albums that I think is one of the best albums or double albums of all time, as a matter of fact, to be honest. But I think with the whole entire way through of this album being at 71.5 minutes, there are some great tracks to this record. The first opening song of Do You Know What I Mean is almost 8 minutes, but I do think this is one of the greatest Oasis songs of all time. It is a very huge, bombastic, and very loud anthem of a song, obviously with its structure being very alike to their biggest hit of Wonderwall, but I think with these different sounds including the helicopter sound to begin the track, usages of the wah-wah to the uni vibe, and also so many of these different sounds going on all over the place, with loud crashing cymbals and drums, distorting guitars, the harmonies of Liam and Noel together. I think this is still one of my top 5, while it is, like, in my eyes, as strong as, like, Rock and Roll Star. I think, do you know what I mean, as a song by itself, as I said, it's very loud, it's anthemic, but I think this is one of the perfect numbers in their discography. To another song that I really enjoy so much of the album, which is Fade In Out, and it does feature Johnny Depp on slide guitar. And Fade In Out as a song, for me, is one of the more underrated tracks. That's another thing about this album. There are some great songs on here, but on some of the later half of the album goes, there are tracks that I like so much that some people can ignore them, which is a bit of a shame, with the minor drop D tune guitar, hearing Johnny Depp doing slide guitar contributions, and hearing Liam's vocals in quite a melodic way. This is a really great song for what it is. I like how moody it progresses on to one of the great tracks on the album that I think is another very loud and a distorted cacophony called It's Getting Better Man. Again, just like Fading Out, I think this is an awesome, underrated jam. To the singles like of, do you know what I mean, Stand By Me. Lyrically, on Inspirations, Noel decided to write this after he had, you know, some throwing up experiences after going through some food poisoning. But I think this track, like on Do You Know What I Mean, does have a loud sound, including these feedback, distorting guitars and compressions, and even the orchestrations that come in and out, with a great chorus, hearing Liam and Noel together once again. But I think with the whole compression side of this album, that is one of the flaws I have on the album. The original production to the record is too overproduced, because you hear these guitars at such very high mix and frequencies that it ruins the comfortability of getting into the whole thing in the first place. You barely hear everything in a perfect match of hearing the other instruments of acoustic guitars to the orchestrations, and lack of the bass guitar sound. And also in 2016, Noel did decide to re-release the album, but I find with the 2016 version, that is more of the favourable pick for me to listen to the album. It's, to me, very, very improving in my listening ability of the album. I hear everything much more clearer, and it's controlled in a better depth. There are a few songs on the album that I do think there are some weaknesses, like of the length to songs like Magic Pie. At 7 minutes, structure-wise, is very decent, and I do like the overall progression of the song with Noel's vocals as well, but over time it does drag on so much. And also, not to mention, with one of the lyrics that references the Stone Roses classic tune of I Wanna Be Adored. And also, one of the songs that I do not care for is The Girl in the Dirty Shirt. To me, this is one of the songs where I just never been hooked by it whatsoever. It's one of the weakest Oasis songs, in my opinion. To the reprise of the album to finalise things of All Around the World. And speaking of All Around the World, the song itself, being the longest song to this record at 9.5 minutes, is disastrously very much way too long. And this was one of the first ever tracks Noel had been writing with the lineup before they went to Definitely Maybe. I think earlier on in the song it sounds great. I love the brilliant melody to the structure and hearing Liam's awesome vocals, but the song was completely transcending into below mediocrity with the highly bloated and extreme sound to the dragging on feeling of making the song go on for far too long, as well as the two different key changes. It didn't really help that much, which I think is very disappointing, because this could have been one of the other great examples of the album, but it just does not fulfill me as much as I wanted it to be after like the first 3 or 4 minutes. And speaking of Liam as the main frontman for the band, this album does contain one of his best vocal arrangements, like on Do You Know What I Mean, and also to All Around the World. But one of the other singles, Don't Go Away, which Liam sounded pretty heart-feeling and emotional, and I believe after he recorded the vocals for this particular track, he ended up feeling like crying. And I do understand that, because the song as a whole can be pretty moving for some people, and again, it's one of the highlights on the album. Great example of one of Noel Gallagher's best guitar works. Incredibly effective, and as well with the rest of the band, they were working things out very efficiently. And also to mention, some of the lyrics very weak on numerous occasions. I do think that Be Here Now does have a reputation where it does change reactions over time for many people. And as with Liam, in his own words, he cited this as his favourite Oasis album, and also Noel was very dismissive about the album over time. But I, for once, will have to say that Be Here Now, after listening to it on multiple occasions, can be a bit of a grower. I personally simplify things, that it's not one of the best ever albums in their discography, and not one of the best albums of all time, but I think this is still a very good record for what it is, and I am interested enough to see what your comments and thoughts are about this album down below. So with that being said, I think I'm going to give this album an 8 out of 10, despite the very negative drawbacks that I had expressed. This is a record that I do like quite a lot from time to time, and no wonder it still contains one of my favourite Oasis tracks ever, so I can't really dismiss this album that much. But, you know, I think this is still a very good album as a whole. That's personally all I would like to say for Be Here Now by Oasis, and I am interested to see your thoughts on it. Thank you guys for watching, and I will keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.